Too loud. People in the last row, is this visible? Okay, are we ready to start? 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Okay, so we are resuming. So it's been a long pause. When did we stop? December? So it's more than 3 months. And okay, so we'll start with the homage to the Buddha 3 times. Namo tassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so welcome back, everybody, and good morning. Don't think I was lazy for 3 months. Okay, so now, oops. Maybe, Jason, it's too loud. When I raise my voice, and it becomes almost shattering, earth-shattering. Okay, let us test. Yeah, that seems okay. Okay, this is good. Okay, so this sutta is called, in Pali, is called the Kattavatu Sutta, which is translated as bases of talk. And in my numbering, this is in the Book of Threes. We're in the Book of Threes now of the Anguttara Nikaya, the book of numerical discourses. And in my numbering, this is number 67. In the Burmese script edition that I consulted, it comes out number 68. Sometimes there are little differences in the numbering. And some parts of the sutta, I have to say, are a bit puzzling to me. But anyway, we'll take a look. There are some important points in the sutta that should be considered, particularly the verses. I find the verses very meaningful. Okay, so it starts off, the Buddha says, there are these 3 bases of talk. So that's where you get the expression kattavatu. And so referring to the past, one would say, so it was in the past. Referring to the future, one would say, so it will be in the future. Referring to the present, one would say, so it is now at present. I mean, this seems pretty obvious. It doesn't really take a fully enlightened Buddha to say this. So I'm a bit puzzled why this is brought in here. make it bigger. Let's see if we maximize. It's still the same size, but let us go up. Okay, now it's good. Okay, so now, after this, it seems like a very simple introductory paragraph. Now the Buddha comes into some important points. So he says it is in relation to talk or discussion that a person may be understood as either fit to talk or unfit to talk. And actually from the Pali there was some ambiguity about this. So it says, yadiva kacho, yadiva akacho. That's the Pali, which could be interpreted in either of two ways. One is whether the person is fit to talk, to give a talk, and the other is whether a person is fit to talk to, fit to have a discussion with. In fact, now I'm actually inclined to that second interpretation, though I had translated it years ago as whether the person is fit to give a talk or not fit to give a talk. But maybe the sense is whether the person is fit to talk to have a discussion with. And this is in relation, not ordinary conversation, but this pertains probably to the kind of principles that should be observed when ascetics of different schools of thought in the ancient Indian scene, when they meet in some of the discussion grounds, the halls set up for Dhamma discussions, whether it's suitable to have a discussion with them, or maybe whether one monastic is suitable to have a discussion with about the Dharma. Okay, so here the Buddha uses as the framing for this 4 types of questions. So there's a question that should be answered categorically. That means definitively, definitely, without any ambiguity. And he does not answer it categorically. Okay, so what's a question that should be answered categorically? Okay, to take a very elementary, obvious example, is it okay to kill another human being? Here the answer, without any ambiguity, it's not okay, it's unwholesome. Killing is blameworthy, it's morally wrong. Is it okay to steal? Definitely no. Are all conditioned things impermanent or not? The answer, all conditioned things are impermanent. Okay, if he asks a question that should be answered after making a distinction, and he answers it without making a distinction. Okay, so that's the second type of question. I want to see the Pali of this. I don't know how to make the Pali text any bigger. But here the word for distinction here is vibhajya, then vyakarana is to be answered. So vibhajya means having made a distinction, having divided. Bhajati means to divide. Vibhajati, to divide in two. Okay, so actually there's an example of this that comes up. It's in the Anguttara Nikaya Book of Ten, somewhere in the 90s. The householder Anathapindika meets some wanderers belonging to other sects, and they ask Anathapindika, we hear that the Buddha condemns all kinds of tapas. You know what tapas means? Austerity. And it was used in that time to mean ascetic practices. So does the Buddha condemn all types of tapas? Because we know from the account of the Buddha's life that he undertook various types of self-mortification, and then he rejected them and said that this is an extreme that doesn't lead to enlightenment, to liberation. And so they were taking this to mean that the Buddha condemns and rejects all kinds of tapas, all kinds of austere practices. And then Anathapindika says that the Buddha is one who speaks vibhajyavado. He's one who speaks making a distinction. Let me get a note file where I can blow up the text. Yeah, so the word here is vibhajya. Vibhajya is having distinguished, having divided. And then vada it gives a sense of a doctrine and assertion. Okay, so the Buddha is one, he's a vibhajyavadi, one who speaks making a distinction. And so then Anathapindika goes on to explain that the Buddha says that there are different kinds of tapas, different kinds of ascetic practices or austerity. He says, if a certain kind of austere practice, a certain kind of tapas, if one undertakes it, if unwholesome states increase and wholesome mental states diminish, that kind of tapas the Buddha rejects. And that would include the various kinds of self-mortification that were practiced by some of the other schools of spiritual schools of the time. But, he says, if one undertakes certain tapas, certain austere practices, and wholesome states increase and unwholesome states diminish, that kind of tapas the Buddha approves of. So that would include, there are certain kinds of austere practices that the Buddha recommended for the monastics, being content with the 3 robes, the 3 monastic robes, and even better is picking up patches of discarded cloth left in the cremation ground, sewing them together and then dyeing them oneself. I just laugh because I notice when Will crossed his legs, I notice he's wearing, this is the kind of contemporary equivalent of the cast-off robes made of cast-off rags, the blue jeans that they're selling. Wow, that's a real ascetic. The kind of blue jeans that are worn out with holes in them. And then going on alms round, going on alms round, living at the foot of a tree, or living in the forest, not staying in the towns or cities. So those are kinds of ascetic practices that the Buddha commended, if they lead to the increase of wholesome states like simplicity, contentment, devotion to meditation practice, and don't lead to unwholesome states, as they can, like pride and arrogance. I have a robe of cast-off rags. The other monks are wearing beautifully stitched and dyed robes given by householders. I eat just one meal a day, they take breakfast and lunch. So that can be a pride based on ascetic practices. Okay. Okay, another more like philosophical question. I said all conditioned things are impermanent. So there, one could say that there's no distinction. That's answered categorically. All conditioned things, things that arise through causes and conditions are impermanent. Is everything impermanent? That's a common misunderstanding of Buddhism. People say, everything is impermanent. That's what the Buddha teaches. No. Here, one would have to make a distinction. The Buddha teaches that conditioned things, sankharas, things arisen through causes and conditions, are impermanent. But nibbana, the unconditioned, he doesn't use the word nicha, permanent, but he says in Pali that it's duva, which means like stable, or achyuta, not perishing, amata, deathless, and so forth. So that's a question that is answered by making a distinction. Okay, then there is a question that should be answered with a counter question. Let's see, I think the commentary gives some examples of this. Not such a good example, but okay, we just take it. So does the eye have the same nature as the ear? So one should answer this by asking with respect to what? So with respect to seeing. So in that case, one should answer no. That the eye has the function of seeing, the ear the function of hearing. But then if they answer with respect to impermanence, then would one answer yes, the eye is impermanent, the ear is impermanent. Okay, maybe another type of question that would be answered with a counter question when we say, does the Buddha teach that God exists? Okay, so then you would have to answer with the question, what do you mean by God? So if they say, well, is there an eternal, everlasting, all-powerful creator of the universe who rules the universe according to his will? Then the answer would be no, that the Buddha teaches that there is no such God. But if you ask, when you're asked, wait, who's speaking now? Okay, somebody asked me, does the Buddha teach that God exists? So then I answer with the counter question, what do you mean by God? Okay, so then I say that if by God you mean beings in various heavenly worlds, with longer lifespan than human beings, greater pleasure than human beings, more power than human beings, yes, the Buddha teaches that there are such gods in the plural, but not one single all-powerful God. And then the fourth is the questions types of questions to be set aside. Okay, so this is called the tappaniya panha, the question that should be set aside. And in the Buddha's time, there was a set of questions like this that were always being debated by the different philosophers and spiritual seekers of that period. And invariably, people would come to the Buddha and pose those questions to the Buddha. The questions were, is the world eternal or non-eternal? Is the world finite or infinite? Is the soul the same as the body or different from the body? Does the Tathagata, the liberated one, exist after death or not exist after death? Or both exist and not exist after death? Neither exist nor not exist after death. So when the Buddha was asked those questions, he would say, this has not been declared by the Tathagata. So he would refuse to answer those questions. Okay, so the rest of the sutta, or the rest of this part of the sutta, distinguishes that the person who is not fit to talk to is one who doesn't respond to these questions in the proper way, and the one who is fit to talk to is one who responds to those questions in the proper way. Okay, then we come to a section of the sutta which seems to be concerned with the principles that should be observed in conducting a discussion with somebody. These seem to be almost like the rules governing debate between proponents of different positions. Yeah, here it seems to be set to make sense to take this as a person who is fit to talk, rather than the person who is fit to talk to. Okay, so if a person is asked a question and he does not stand firm in regard to his own position and the opposing position, if he does not stand firm in his stratagem, if he does not stand firm in an assertion about what is known, if he does not stand firm in the procedure, in such a case, this person is unfit to talk. And I have to say, confess that a lot of these expressions, I'm not so clear myself about the meaning of them. So I took a long explanatory note from the commentary. And I don't want to go into that long note from the commentary, but you can read that on your own. But I want to go into the next section of the sutta, which I think is more relevant to the kinds of discussions that we have in our usual day-to-day life. Often, these are discussions that take place when we have discussions of Dhamma discussions with people that we know, our friends, or people that we meet. And also these are kinds of discussions that occasionally, very, very occasionally, I peek into some of these Dhamma chat rooms of websites where people have Dhamma chats. Usually I don't stay long in them. Because what I say is that often the discussion can become very bitter and people will start denouncing one another. The administrator will usually step in at a certain point and say, hold on now, you have to be polite and conduct this discussion in a cordial way. But people tend to hold to their views on Dhamma very tightly and then get very aggressive when confronting other views that are different from their own. Yeah, this is where we see people displaying anger, hatred, and bitterness in a discussion. Yeah, sometimes if you ask, and when you're in a discussion like this, if you ask the person a pointed question to try to pin them into a corner in regard to their position, then they'll try to escape by answering evasively, or they'll divert the discussion to an irrelevant subject, or else they'll display anger, hatred and bitterness. So that's the kind of person that's unfit to have a discussion with. Okay, but the person who doesn't answer evasively, doesn't divert the discussion, and doesn't display anger, hatred, and bitterness, that is the kind of person that is fit to have a discussion with. Oh yeah, this is another kind of person that's unfit to have the discussion with. So if the person is asked the question, and then he overwhelms or he attacks the questioner, maybe comes in at a personal level, ad hominem level, attacking the questioner, crushes him, ridicules him, or seizes upon just a slight error. So that's a person that's unfit to have a discussion with. Yeah, the note is actually pretty obvious. Okay, but if a person doesn't carry on the discussion like that, that's the person that one could have a discussion with. Okay, now we come to a passage which, again, it's not completely clear to me, but we'll take a look at it. Okay, so the text, again, it says it's in relation to talk that a person should be understood as either having a supporting condition or not having a supporting condition. Okay, one who does not lend an ear does not have a supporting condition. One who lends an ear has a supporting condition. And the word rendered supporting condition here is upanisa. And the commentary glosses this with upanisaya, which just doesn't really add very much. So it's not perfectly clear what is meant here by a supporting condition. And the commentary doesn't elaborate on this. It just gives synonyms. But let's just see how the text continues. Okay, so what's important here is ohita soto. That is the expression that means to lend an ear. That's a lending an ear in order to hear the Dhamma. Yeah, and this expression, ohita soto, the word sota means ear, and ohita is to place down. So it's like listening closely. And so this is, obviously, it means listening closely to the Dhamma when it's being expounded. So this person who listens closely when the Dhamma is being expounded, maybe we could say that he has a condition for realizing the Dhamma. And so it's by listening closely that one is able to absorb the meaning of the Dhamma. First one absorbs the meaning, one takes in the words of the Dhamma that are being expounded. Then by attending wisely to the meaning, then one gains that condition for the realization of the Dhamma. And so it's said in some other suttas that one of the conditions for penetrating to the truth of the Dhamma, for gaining the direct right insight into the Dhamma, is paragosa, which means the voice of another person. So it's through hearing the Dhamma being expounded by another person that one gains the information. You need information in order to gain realization. So one gains that, maybe that's the condition here, or that supporting condition is the information that you need to gain realization. So you gain the instructions and practice, the instructions and the principles to be seen with wisdom. And that comes, one gains that information by lending an ear. If one doesn't go to hear the Dhamma being expounded, you don't get that information. Or if when the Dhamma is being expounded, you don't pay attention, you don't listen carefully, maybe in the side of your notebook you doodle, make pictures, the way I used to do in political science class many years ago in college, then you don't get a clear enough grasp on the information to use it properly. Or if when the Dhamma is being expounded, you get drowsy and fall asleep, you don't get the information. So it's getting that information by lending an ear that you have that supporting condition. And then the text says, one who has a supporting condition directly knows one thing, fully understands one thing, abandons one thing, and realizes one thing. And then by directly knowing one thing, fully understanding one thing, abandoning one thing, and realizing one thing, he reaches right liberation. There's a note here. Let's see what the note says. Okay, he directly knows one thing, a wholesome Dhamma. Can you see in the back? It's a smaller font. I'll just read it up. The next level is 400, which I don't want to go to. Okay, so it says, the one thing that one directly knows is the noble path. The one thing one fully understands is the truth of suffering. The one thing one abandons is all unwholesome qualities. The one thing one realizes is the fruit of arhatship, or the truth of cessation. And then by means of knowledge, one reaches right liberation, emancipation by the fruit of arhatship. So that's the explanation in the commentary. Okay, so then sort of the Buddha concludes that part of the discussion by saying that through the direct knowledge, full understanding, abandoning, and realization, one reaches right liberation. Then he brings the whole discourse to its conclusion by saying that this is the goal of talk, the goal of discussion, the goal of the supporting condition, the goal of lending an ear, that is the emancipation of the mind through non-clinging. So all of the talk, and this is talk on Dhamma, not talk about the weather or talk about things that we discuss in ordinary life, but having talk on the Dhamma, discussion on the Dhamma, lending an ear to discourses on the Dhamma, that goal always has to be kept in mind, the emancipation of the mind through anupadana, the absence of clinging. Yeah, so anupada is the absence of upadana, the absence of clinging or grasping. And vimokkha is liberation, emancipation. And it's the emancipation of the mind. This is the complete or final emancipation, not the temporary emancipation. There are different kinds of temporary emancipation of mind through the loving kindness, through the jhanas, but this is the ultimate or final liberation. Okay, then I said earlier that what's interesting here is the verses of the sutta, which seem to be discussing different ways in which the ascetics of the time would carry on discussions. And so it speaks about some who speak with quarrelsome intent. They like to engage in debates just for the purpose of, winning in arguments, in debates. So they're settled in their opinions, attached to their own opinions, and they're full of pride because maybe they're very skilled in debate, and they go about arguing with others, debating with others, defeating them in debate. And they're said to be ignoble. They attack the virtues of others, and they look for openings or weak spots in the other person in order to attack them. And then when their opponent in this discussion or debate says something wrong, makes a mistake, then they become delighted. And they rejoice in the bewilderment of the others and defeating them in debate. But the Buddha says the noble ones don't engage in that kind of talk. And so how does one carry on a discussion? So if the wise person wants to talk, first one has to know the right time to carry on the discussion. So if the other person is engaged in some kind of other activity, you don't go up to them and start debating with them. But you have to find a time when the other person is at leisure, or else you arrange a time to have the discussion. Then you carry on the discussion. And then one speaks without quarrelsome intent and without pride, without being proud of one's skill in speaking. And so the sagely person the sagely person should utter the speech that the noble ones practice, which is connected with the Dhamma and which is meaningful. But the word atta here also means the goal. So it's speech that's connected with the Dhamma and with the goal. Speech which is meaningful and relevant to the goal. Okay, so not being insolent or aggressive, not having a mind that's elated or swollen with pride, free from envy, one speaks on the basis of right knowledge. And if the other person speaks well and sort of declares a good point, a valid point, one should approve of it, not think that you have to argue against every position coming from somebody else. And then if the other person speaks badly, one might correct the person, but not attack them for their faults. And so one doesn't train in fault finding or seize on the other's mistakes, not trying to crush the opponent or speaking. One should not speak mendacious, that's false, deceptive words. And so here the discussion amongst the good is for the sake of knowledge, for right understanding, and for the sake of confidence, that's inspiring trust and confidence in the good Dhamma. Okay, so such is the way the noble discuss things. That's the discussion of the noble ones. And so having understood this, the wise person should not swell up, but should discuss things in such a way. Okay, so that is the sutta on the basis of talk. Okay, so any questions or comments on this? Yeah, please, yeah. Yeah, there's a microphone. You please take the microphone.
I understand that you're saying this is relevant to the Dharma,
Yeah.
but it also seems that it would be good for regular conversation too.
Yeah, that's certainly the case.
And
yeah.
I was thinking, about lawyers and how in court they attack each other and they go after every point, and how in some ways how beneficial this would be if people would address their discords in this manner.
Exactly so, exactly so. I think within the court of law, I mean, I have to say it's a weak spot within the legal system, that the lawyer, he's a paid professional, and so he has to win the case, not really try to find out in collaboration with the lawyer representing the other side what really happened, and then trying to determine the case on the basis of a mutual understanding of what really happened. But that's the way, the sort of commercialization of the legal profession. And in politics, it's the same thing. I mean, there's always been weak spots in American politics, but I remember, like when I was in college back in those days, at least there was some attempt between Republicans and Democrats to find common ground, some kind of areas of agreement, and try to find some policies that would be beneficial to the people of the country, even though there were many shortcomings. But nowadays, it's just like, particularly on one side, I don't want to mention which side, but the task is just to obstruct whatever the other side is proposing. Even if the other side proposes to make a law or a recognition that when it rains, one gets wet, the other side will come up with arguments that no, when it rains, you don't get wet. If you dive into water, you get wet. No, if you dive into water, you don't get wet. Yeah, any other comments on this?
Excuse me. At the beginning of the excerpt, it said that that in order to be worthy to talk to, one must remain firm in their assertions. But then later, it says that one must be open to change their opinions when new information is presented. So I wanted to ask, what is the difference between those two things, if there is any?
Yeah, that statement that one should be firm in one's assertion.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does seem to be somewhat in contradiction. Let's look at the note where I take the commentary's explanation of that and see. Oh, it gets to a rather it's a very, very complex note. And I see that there's another way to interpret this. Actually, looking at the Pali, there's another way to interpret this. Because this compound here, tana, tane, also can have the meaning, what is the case and is what is not the case. In fact, the word tana, you see it in the Sanskrit form, sthana. Sthana is related to the English word station. So what is the case, what stands, and what does not stand? So it could be interpreted that one has to stand firmly in what is the case and what is not the case. In fact, that seems to be a more reasonable translation now, in my opinion, than standing firm in regard to one's position and the opposing position.
Okay.
So one should take one's stand upon what actually happened and what did not happen, what was not the case. That's a better explanation. And I thought I saw another. Yeah.
The phrase fit to talk or fit to talk to and unfit to talk or unfit to talk to, it sounds a little harsh. It's so much of this is reasonable, it's about reasonable discourse, but I was wondering if the Pali also sounds a little harsh, or if you think that it sounds a little harsh. You know, just the idea that, well, this person isn't fit to talk to.
I don't think that's the implication.
Okay.
It's just that who has the qualities that qualify a person to give a talk on the one hand, and the kind of person that would want to have a discussion with. It's not that I'm not going to talk to that person because that person maybe is a bit aggressive and argumentative. But if I'm going to have a discussion with a person, one has to be sure that that person is the kind of person that it's desirable to have a discussion with. The person who's not going to get angry and aggressive and just use the opportunity of the discussion to attack and look for weak spots and try to sort of crush one and demolish one in a discussion. It's not sort of referring to like everyday interactions between people. Okay, is that Johnny? Yeah.
Andy, say a person is unfitted to talk to about, say, panya, and is get so keen on his wrong will. But is it possible the person still fit to talk about sila?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, that's a good point, because there is another sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya. I'm not sure whether we took this already, or maybe it's in the Book of Fives, where the Buddha speaks about that there's one kind of person that's fit to speak to about dana, that's giving, generosity. Another kind of person is fit to speak to about sila, about about precepts. Another kind of person is fit to speak to about. There were several categories, and one was panya. So you have to know the minds of the audience in order to know which is the person that's fit to speak to about what topic. And
I have a follow-up. So
you have a follow-up question.
If you find someone is getting angry, talking about panya, so we can change the topic to him or her more comfortable.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah, one has to know, it's one of the skills is knowing how to give the appropriate talk to the particular person one is in the discussion with.
Bhante, on the notepad, you wrote down some phrases, and I wasn't quite quick enough to copy that one down that I wanted to see there. This the phrase on the bottom. I just wanted to make a note of that.
Yeah, okay.
With your translation of it, if I could.
Yeah. And I see another hand there, yeah. Mano?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Bhante. Just want to try and link up what you've been saying to the current discussions of trying to differentiate fact and opinion. It seems like there's always a different way to interpret a situation, and I don't know if there's a way of approaching the sutta from that perspective where not everything you necessarily believe walking into a discussion may be in fact true. So the concept of listening and hearing the other person out without necessarily concluding prior to the discussion that what you know is true.
Yeah. I think that's one of the points definitely being made in the sutta, particularly in the verses.
Yeah, and thank you, Bhante. It seems like the sutta is focusing more on the how. In other words, don't get angry when talking, as opposed to the what. I mean, you should always listen to what they're saying, just not necessarily getting into a discussion with the person who's getting angry and maybe getting heated up while they're talking about it. Is that the case? It's more.
Definitely, yeah.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, let us see if we can move on to another sutta now. This sutta has some interesting points. Okay, this is number 68 in the Book of Threes. It's called Other Sects, the Wanderers of Other Sects. So here the Buddha is explaining to the monks how they should answer when certain questions are posed to them by the wanderers of other sects. So the wanderers of other sects might come and they say that there are these three things. So these are the three root defilements often taught by the Buddha. So the three are greed, hatred, and delusion. So they're asking, what is the distinction between them? So the Buddha then asked the monks, if you're asked in that way, how should you answer? And then the monks sort of punt on the challenge given by the Buddha, and they say, the stock passage, our teachings are rooted in the Blessed One, guided by the Blessed One, take recourse in the Blessed One. You should explain to us, and when we hear it from you, then we'll understand. Okay, so the Buddha goes on to explain. So this is the way you should answer. You should say that lust is slightly blameworthy, but slow to fade away. Hatred is very blameworthy, but quick to fade away. Delusion is very blameworthy and slow to fade away. I have to say some things here, one has to put some qualifications around. Okay, first, I think the elaborations are given by the commentary, which is in the note. Okay, so the reason lust here, or raga, is slightly blameworthy, and so this is referring to the context, say, so the commentary gives the example of marriage. So marriage, in a married relationship, the couple will have the opportunity to indulge in sensual lust, because that's one of the activities in the marital relationship. And so one doesn't blame that indulgence in lust when it takes place in the context of marriage, or let us say in today's culture, in the context of a committed relationship between two people. But lust, the indulgence in lust, is accompanied by pleasant feeling. And so, for that reason, it's slow to fade away. There's a strong attachment to lust or to the objects of lust. Because lust arises in regard to, well, let's say, craving or desire, or attachment arise in regard to pleasurable objects. So generally one becomes attached to pleasurable objects, and one indulges the desire for pleasurable objects. So even if one enjoys beautiful music, delicious food, okay, so even I would like change of food once in a while. So that's a kind of lust, an enjoyment of pleasant, delicious food. So you don't say you're blameworthy for that. But that desire, it's slow to fade away. Okay, but hatred is very blameworthy, that's clear. But here the text says it's quick to fade away. Okay, the reason it's said to be quick to fade away is that hatred or anger is accompanied by, this is according to the Abhidhammic way of thinking, by unpleasant feeling, disagreeable feeling. And so one wants to get rid of that hatred. And so for that reason, I think it's said to be quick to fade away. But this is where I have some qualifications. Hatred can really, between two people or between groups of people in which there's been a traditional antagonism, that can go on for generations. So it isn't all that quick to fade away. Use the microphone so it gets into the...
Bhante, if there's hatred though between two groups, right, for long periods of time, wouldn't that also generally also have delusion accompanying it?
Yeah, there's always delusion accompanying both lust and hatred. Yeah, but now we're speaking about, I guess, in terms of dominance, which of these particular roots is dominant? Okay, so hatred is, according to this text, it's quick to fade away, but I would say maybe on an individual occasion, say if I get angry about something, I have some aversion towards something, then I want to get rid of it because it's disagreeable, so I want to settle down and make the mind calm. But we see just, the books of history, they say, are written in blood, ink made out of blood. Like antagonism between different schools of religious schools that go on for generations. Even different families can go on from parents to children. Then when they grow up, they become antagonistic to the children of the other family. So it's not all that quick to fade away. Okay, then delusion is very blameworthy, because delusion is really synonymous with ignorance, which is said to be the root, the most basic root of all unwholesome states. And it's slow to fade away because it's very difficult to overcome delusion or ignorance. Let's just see what the note says here. Okay, so lust is less blameworthy, illustrated with the example of marriage, which is socially accepted, and it's less blameworthy in regard to the karmic consequences, that is, if it takes place within a socially acceptable framework. And then because it's connected with pleasure, with pleasant feeling, it's hard to remove. And hatred and delusion are both regarded as blamable in society and have serious karmic consequences. Hatred, though, is connected with displeasure or unpleasant feeling. And since people naturally want happiness or pleasure, they want to get rid of hatred. And then deluded ideas can also, especially if they're connected with craving or wrong views or conceit, can be hard to remove. Okay, then some of this what comes here, we actually encountered at the very beginning of the Anguttara Nikaya, but that goes back about 2 years, so you can look at it again. Okay, so here, suppose they ask, what is the reason unarisen lust arises and arisen lust increases and expands? And then the answer is an attractive object. The Pali expression here is subha-nimitta. So subha is something which is beautiful and pleasurable. And then for one who attends carelessly to an attractive object, unarisen lust arises and arisen lust increases and expands. And the key expression here is attends carelessly. Yeah, so this is the verb form, but we know this in terms of the noun form, ayoniso manasikara. So this word here, ayoniso, or the opposite, yoniso, very important words in the whole context of the Dhamma. So yoniso has the sense of thoroughly, carefully, methodically. And then the prefix negates that. So this is carelessly, superficially, not thoroughly. What are some other good words? Carelessly, superficially, sloppily. Any others? Cavalierly. Any simple, common, ordinary word? Thoughtlessly. Anyway, you get the idea. Okay, then the word manasikara It's manasi is in the mind. It means in the mind. And kara is activity. So this is activity in the mind which is done superficially and carelessly, or cavalierly. So just sort of looking at things on the surface, not reflecting deeply upon them. And then the attractive object, the beautiful object, when you attend carelessly, then lust or desire arises. And then what shows the Buddha's yoniso way of thinking is the way he distinguishes unarisen lust arises, and then arisen lust increases. So you have this distinction. Okay, then what is the reason that unarisen hatred arises and arisen hatred increases and expands? And then the answer is a repulsive object. So this is patigga nimitta. Yeah, so here nimitta is the object, and patigga, it has the sense of aversion, repulsion. So this would be some object that causes one to feel aversion or repulsion. And so sometimes if there's a person, say, that creates a lot of trouble and difficulty for you, and then you come into a room and you look around and you see that person there, so you could say that person is a patigga nimitta. So when you have the sight of that person, then the displeasure arises, aversion arises. And then as you dwell on that person, even the way the person speaks, the way they move, even if they're not saying anything offensive to you, but just the way that person acts and speaks can cause that hatred to increase and become stronger. So that's the reason unarisen hatred arises and arisen hatred increases and expands. And sometimes speech is a way of inflaming the passion of hatred. Somebody goes on denouncing other people. Takes place often today. Goes on denouncing other people again and again, sometimes with distortions, lies. And it causes the hatred to arise and then to increase and expand. And that comes through, again, through attending carelessly to that repulsive object. If you attend carefully, even to the attractive or beautiful object, then the lust can be abandoned and the hatred can be abandoned. Okay, then what is the reason that unarisen delusion arises and arisen delusion increases and expands? And then here, interestingly, the answer is simply careless attention. It's not careless attention to one thing or another thing, but just attending carelessly to things in general. And usually the way the commentaries that explain the careless attention here that causes the delusion to arise and increase is attending to things as being permanent, pleasurable, and as being self. As being, rather than attending to them as impermanent, dukkha, and non-self. And so for attending carelessly in general, unarisen delusion arises and arisen delusion increases and expands. Okay, then comes the next set of questions. What is the reason or what is the method by which unarisen lust doesn't arise and arisen lust is abandoned, and then the answer is an unattractive object. And there the Pali is Asubha-nimitta. And this expression, Asubha-nimitta, then takes on a kind of technical meaning within the context of Buddhist monastic life. It comes to mean specifically the antidote to sexual desire, the contemplation of the body as consisting of the 32 constituents, from the hairs of the head, hairs of the body, nails, teeth, skin, the various internal organs, the bodily fluids, and so on, as a means to reduce and eventually overcome sexual desire. Okay, then what is the method to prevent hatred from arising and to abandon arisen hatred? So here the answer is the liberation of the mind by loving kindness. This is the metta, Ceto Vimutti. So when one develops the mind of loving kindness, wishing, may all beings be well, may they all be happy, may they all be safe, even though the tendency to hatred might be strong and persistent, but through this repeated practice, hatred is gradually reduced and then overcome, and the mind becomes radiant with universal loving kindness. And then what is the antidote to delusion? So the answer is careful attention, yoniso manasikara. So one has to attend carefully to things, and that would be specifically attending carefully to things as being marked by the three characteristics: impermanent, dukkha, unsatisfactory, and not self. So that is the way to prevent delusion from arising and to abandon the arisen delusion. And that takes us to the end of this sutta. So, any questions about this? Okay, Daniel? And again, take the wireless microphone.
Good morning, Bhante. Just with regard to yoniso manasikara, there's a distinction to be made in the Pali between carelessness and heedlessness.
You're asking if there's a distinction? If there's a
distinction to be made in the Pali between carelessness and heedlessness.
Yeah, the word that's usually translated as heedlessness is pamada. Let's say that they're not identical, but you could say that there's a certain maybe affiliation between them. That heedlessness, let us say it's more an attitude, whereas a yoniso manasikara is more a way of looking at things, a way of reflecting upon things, a way of perceiving things. Yeah, so that's in brief the way I would characterize the distinction. It's an interesting question that should be investigated more. I never thought of that question before. But just sort of off the top of my head, that's the way I would distinguish them. Of course, ayoniso, it always goes with, or generally it goes with manasikara, which is a way of thinking, a mental activity, of reflecting. Whereas pamada, heedlessness, it's being indulgent, sort of indulging in pleasures, not caring about one's long-term well-being and happiness, one's long-term future. So just drifting along with pleasure and pleasurable, with present enjoyment, with present pleasure. Any further questions? Yeah, please. Yeah, drifting along with a present pleasure rather than considering one's long-term well-being and happiness. Yeah, that's the way I would put, that's heedlessness. It's sort of that drifting along and being self-indulgent. Whereas ayoniso manasikara is looking at things superficially, carelessly, thinking in careless ways.
Bhante, there's a question related to Sutra number 67.
Yeah.
I'm not quick enough to ask. The question is, it's a mystery to me how sophisticated the Buddha understanding of the dialogue is.
His understanding of what?
Understand that the communication, the dialogue.
Yeah.
And he was wondering where Buddha, can Bhante tell where the uncanny ability of the Buddha, of this ability came from?
I guess you'd say it comes from his Anguttara Sammasambodhi, his unsurpassed perfect enlightenment. But it's also, I mean, it struck me, not just with this sutta, but especially with the Buddha's suttas, like how does he get the sutta about the steps that a goldsmith goes through in refining gold when he's not trained as a goldsmith himself?
And the horse simile.
Or the training of a horse, the stages in the training of a horse. Well, actually, as a kshatriya, he might have had that kind of training. Okay, then we'll break for the meal, and then we'll come back, let's say 12:15, and then we can have some further discussion. And just a few announcements. Yeah, for our organization, Buddhist Global Relief, which has the purpose of providing assistance to poor communities around the world faced with the problems of chronic hunger and malnutrition. One of our major fundraising activities each year is the concert to feed the hungry. And this year it will be on April 28th at 5 p.m. in Lower Manhattan at the St. Mark's Church. You don't have to write the address down because there are plenty of cards here which give the information. But it's St. Mark's Church in the Bowery. And the producer of the concert is right here with us. This is Dan Blake. Do you want to say anything about the concert? Okay, so anyway, there'll be an outstanding group of musicians, including Richie Bashai, Sophia Ray, Jeff Williams, and Carmen Staff Trio. And Dan Blake himself will be playing some numbers that he has composed himself based on the Buddha's text, which is the last part of the Tiki-nipata, the Parayana, the way to the beyond. So these are postcards about the walk with more details. And even if you're not able to attend the concert yourself, you can still donate to support the concert. And if you are affiliated with any Dharma Center, Buddhist temple or monastery, apart from Zhuangyan Monastery, elsewhere, there are these posters that you can, or even if you know places in your neighborhood like cultural center, what other kind of places? Vegetarian restaurants. Anyway, you know the kind of places that would be suitable. You could take the poster and then put it up in your place, wherever you think will be suitable. So that is April 28th Sunday, that's at 5 p.m. And again, just to speak about Buddhist Global Relief, we have now something like 35 projects around the world, ranging from even Mongolia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, India, which I visited a partner in India in February. Wonderful, wonderful work they're doing. And then several countries in Africa, Malawi, Kenya, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, Haiti, Nicaragua, Peru, and some of the cities in the United States. And so it's very precious work, and please support the concert. Okay, so now we'll break for the meal and then come back 12:15 for discussion. And we will have the class next week. Oh yeah, I do the sharing of the merits, right? Wow, I need a re-education. I'm so rusty. Okay, so we'll do the sharing of the merits. So we share the merits of our class with the Dhamma-protecting deities, the Nagas or dragon spirits, the Bhutas or the fierce spirits, and then with all sentient beings. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanang. Akasata chabumata Deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe deva anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhuta